Hi, and welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. On today's episode, I am very pleased to have Robert Dilts with me today. Robert is the author of Sleight of Mouth. He's a huge developer, co-developer, however you want to put it, of NLP. So he's a seminal figure in the field. So it's just a thrill to have him here for whatever reason. But as you know, I wrote a book called The User's Guide to Sleight of Mouth based on Robert's work. Robert wrote the original, but he's now coming out with Sleight of Mouth II, another book on Sleight of Mouth. And I just want to know all about it. So we've invited Robert here to let us know what it's all about. So stay tuned. We're going to find out right here, right now.
You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important.
Robert Dilts.
Hey, hey, Doug.
Yes, I live and breathe. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back.
Yes, indeed. That's right. You are now, I think, the most guested person who's been on the podcast more than anybody else. I think that's true. It's not true. You're right up there. So welcome back. And you are in France. We're in Paris,
Yes,
right?
yes, Paris. At my place in Paris. I kind of, go back and forth between Paris and Santa Cruz in California. So
Right.
currently here.
Nice. And how do you say sleight of mouth in French?
Let's see. The magie du langage. So the magic of language. You don't really have a term for sleight of mouth, because it's sleight of hand. But yeah.
How do they say sleight of hand in French?
Je ne sais pas.
we must
see. I don't know.
Inquiring minds want to know, so we need to.
I'll look that one up. But we can do a whole podcast on that one.
Okay. It's a deal. So, Mark Twain once said, those French, they got a different word for everything. So.
Everything. It's true.
It really is true.
Yes.
That Mark Twain. If you have ever any doubts, just quote Mark Twain and you'll be fine.
Yes, and Mark Twain does feature in the new Sleight of Mouth book.
Excellent segue. So tell us Robert, why are you writing Sleight of Mouth II? What's in Sleight of Mouth II? What possessed you? What motivated you? What
That's a great question, Doug. I mean, because it's been I think I wrote volume 1 25 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I've actually been collecting material for since then. I've always planned a volume 2. I mean, even in volume 1, I said there's going to be a volume 2.
Oh.
I've always wanted to do that. And I was originally thinking, okay, this is going to be this kind of an applications kind of a book. I was thinking originally of calling it something about the language of leadership and social change. Because, for me, sleight of mouth is not just only about verbal trickery. It's language patterns that have been used by, people throughout history to make a difference for better or for worse. But, in many cases for better, and really wanted to kind of capture that. So I think one of the main reasons I wanted to do it now is because I do think more and more our world today is a kind of a sleight of mouth world. And what I mean by that is, we've got all the social media, we've got the, metaverse, we have the so-called algorithmic bubbles that people are in. When we look at what's happening in the world.
Could you just define what an algorithmic bubble is? I mean,
algorithmic bubble is, it means that, when you go on the internet or something, you're going to basically, if your news feeds and everything are going to be geared towards the things that you're interested in looking at.
Right. So you're going to get the confirmation bias of what you're already receiving.
Exactly. They're just going to keep feeding you what you already, what you're looking at and looking for.
Right.
So, again, we have these bubbles um, that are kind of a filter, an additional filter on the world.
Right.
And, we get so much of our information, secondhand. We have, if we think about what do we know about what's going on in the world, mostly it's through news feeds, through various kinds of information channels that are not our direct experience. And so
Right.
we have to make decisions. We've got to make sense of things that's primarily coming through words and people's opinions. And we've got to sort out the conspiracy theories from something that's actually helpful or meaningful.
Right.
And the notion of sleight of mouth is that the way in which something is languaged. So you have various types of confirmation bias. You can have attention bias, which is like the algorithmic bubble, but you also have interpretation bias. You can take the same data and interpret it different ways. And so sleight of mouth is about, okay, the way in which I talk about something, the way in which I phrase it or frame it is going to, determine how it's, perceived and received and the meaning that's given to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was just thinking, you look around and at the amount of divisiveness that's happening, in conversation, supposed conversations on the internet and politics. And so what I wanted to do was to say, here, how do you spot some of the red flags that would let you know that something's going to be taking you down the rabbit hole?
Nice.
So one thing we could say with sleight of mouth is basically about the language of beliefs and belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all kind, we use language for all kinds of things, but sleight of mouth is basically about the type of language that we use in order to convey beliefs, in order to make beliefs, or in order to change beliefs. And that's why the subtitle of the book is How Words Can Change Worlds.
Cool.
And so, yeah.
Very good. Hey, it's interesting. You should be saying this, of course, it's really interesting. That's why I have you on the podcast. But I remember I watched a interview with a woman named Catherine Hall Jameson a number of years ago. She's a brilliant political analyst. At least she was. I assume she's still around. But it's this was like 1992 when she was on a Bill Moyers show, and the election that was happening around those days was Clinton, Bush, and Boris Perot.
Yes.
And she was analyzing all their different advertising and showing how each party is trying to frame the conversation with certain buzzwords that everybody in their camp, everybody in their downstream was meant to use those same buzzwords all the time. So with George Bush, it was, who do you trust? Trust. We trust. Bill Clinton was always saying change. We must change. It's about change. We change. And like every other word was change. And what Catherine Hall Jameson said is, she said, we tend to think that we think things and then find the words to express them. But she said, in very many cases, language does our thinking for us.
Right. Good point.
And the way we frame things and what words we use do our thinking for us. And she said, it's interesting in polls that they did, most people, when it came to like negative political ads, she said, oh, people hate those things. People across the board, nobody likes those things. And then they also say that I'm not influenced by those ads. I'm not influenced by these political ads. But then they use the very words of the advertising to explain their vote.
Yes. Interesting. Yeah. And I think, this is one of the things that I'm wanting to do is to, raise awareness of kinds of language. And of course, sleight of mouth is about these 14 language patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, and again, this idea of these red flags, it's like what to pay attention to notice, okay, is is the way that this is phrased going to be helpful or, potentially harmful? For example, just to give a couple of examples,
Okay, please.
along the lines of what you were just talking about.
Uh-huh.
There's a whole notion of what we would call in NLP, an outcome frame versus a problem frame. And so, problem frame is, what's wrong? Whose fault is it? Why did it go wrong? Outcome frame is, well, what do we want? How can we get there? What resources do we have?
Mhm.
And generally, one of the sort of principles of sleight of mouth is that, energy follows attention and language directs attention. So,
Mm.
and language frames attention, as you were saying, you were just pointing out. So, certain kinds of beliefs, certain types of conversations will be all in a problem frame. And generally, obviously, that's not going to necessarily bring you towards some kind of a solution. It's and another kind of a hand in hand with that is this notion of language that's framed, away from versus towards. What are we trying to avoid? And the paradox a lot of times of that is that, the paradox of negation is that, if I say, hey, let's not talk about politics, well, that's exactly what we're bringing attention to. And it's kind of like what you were saying about those ads.
Right.
What I don't like about those ads, but as soon as I start thinking what I don't like about them, that's where all my attention is going. So one of the important things is to realize that, as you're saying, that language itself is a framework of attention. And or another kind of example would be anything that sort of ends up or is organized around negative identity judgments is probably going to end up being problematic.
Mm.
So so there's things like that I think I'm hoping to find some sort of simple principles that people can start to recognize. Hey, wait a minute, this is suspect. I need to do my own thinking about this here, not just let it do the thinking for me.
Right. And tell me, you mentioned before that Mark Twain is referenced in the book. How do you use Mark Twain and other historical characters?
Oh, that Mark Twain has a lot of good one-liners. One is one I'm thinking about at the moment is he says, I think it's in one of his notes or notebooks. He's talking about how he said it was something about a shooting incident, and he said, I took a shot, but he said, but I'm certain that I missed the person because I was really trying to hit him, and I've never hit anything that I've tried to hit before. So the fact that I was trying to hit him is a guarantee that I didn't hit him. So it's a kind of, and that's a kind of an example of a sleight of mouth. It's you're sort of turning it around.
Right. So tell me, who are some of the other historical characters that you've cited in the book, and how specifically do you use them?
There are all kinds of people. There's people from Socrates, and one of the things I wanted to do is say, kind of look at the Socratic method, which is all about examining assumptions and finding and examining assumptions. I use actually a couple of interesting examples from Shakespeare, of the famous sort of Mark Antony speech, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. And where he takes, there's a hostile crowd that within, like, I think it's about 200 or 300 words, he's able to take this crowd and completely shift their attention. Similarly, with the sort of famous speech of Henry V when he's getting his troops to be willing to go into this situation where they're outnumbered 5-1. Now, these are they're fictional. Obviously they're fictional things, and yet you feel and you can sense the the power of it. These kind of reframes.
Yeah.
And then I kind of back those up. Like, for example, I was taking the Henry V example, and then kind of sort of juxtaposing that with what Dwight Eisenhower said to the troops on D-Day. So he's sending people into a situation where they've got to be motivated to risk their lives. What do you say to people? How do you frame this? What kind of language do you use? The very interesting thing, for example, about this Henry V speech is that he's motivating his troops to get they get very enthusiastic, and he never says anything bad about the French. He doesn't even mention the French, which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk about the enemy. He's talking about how this is, says, if years from now, if you survive, you're gonna, strip your sleeves and show your scars and say, I got these, this with my band of brothers. So it's very interesting to kind of think about, well, and this is part of what I wanted to do in this book, is not just to illustrate pattern by pattern,
Right.
show how combinations of these patterns, then if you use certain combinations, that's going to produce certain kinds of results. For instance, using it to motivate is different than using it to turn around, to flip perception of reality, or to go more deeply and examine something. So,
I'm just saying, the combinations of the patterns has always been something I've used and advocate with the people that I teach.
So another example is with Abraham Lincoln is one. And a lot of what he did to sort of, I like to say, it sort of challenged the thought virus of slavery and racism. So and I specifically, I'm not choosing. There's the only one truly contemporary person that I'm using in the book, because I don't want to, how do I say, I'm not trying to, I don't want it to be just topical or political. I mean, I really want to find these fundamental patterns. So the one contemporary person really is Oprah Winfrey. And I'm using Oprah as an interesting example because, speaking about belief systems, because, here's somebody who was, born in poverty to an unwed mother, was sexually abused and pregnant at 14. This is not who you would consider to become the first woman billionaire, let alone woman of color billionaire. So what is it? What is it that she did? And she talks about the importance of, she says something very interesting. She says, you don't become what you want, you become what you believe. And, that's an interesting statement. And, what Sleight of Mouth does, it allows us to sort of look at a statement like that and say, wow, it's, that's a fairly powerful thing, but what is that doing? What is the power of that? How does that set frames or reframe certain things? So, so that's, that's a very important part of the book. I am also, Doug, I'm reviewing all of the 14 patterns, and I'm, one of the things that, as and I acknowledge you in the beginning of the book, that, we've had discussions about, okay, who could be, what's an archetypal example of this pattern? Or I have, so I have like a humorous story or a joke that illustrates each of the pattern. I have something from another person that might be well known to, especially to your audience, would be Milton Erickson. I have an example for each pattern of how Milton Erickson used it in a therapeutic way.
Oh, cool.
Which I think is very interesting. Then there's also illustrations like from famous people. I mentioned Socrates, but also in that mix are people like Jesus as well, who used, at least the records that we have, or that what's been passed down to us, as a very powerful use of language in many ways.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So so and then ultimately, one of the kind of ultimate things I'm also doing in the book is weaving in and showing how when sleight of mouth patterns are used in the framework or from the framework of the patterns or strategies of genius, you bring sleight of mouth and strategies of genius together, then you get a really, really powerful combination. Wow. And that's one of the things I'm showing that somebody like Oprah Winfrey is doing. So, there's in the Strategies of Genius books, there's sort of nine of these patterns of genius. And if you take those 9 patterns and you then use sleight of mouth in conjunction with it, you actually get the type of language that positively changes the world.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds really great. I can hardly wait for my book to arrive so I can dive into that. I remember that even when
one of the things I do, and just also for each of these patterns is I have a half a dozen sort of archetypal sort of beliefs. Like if I speak, people will laugh at me, or no matter what I do, it's not going to be enough, or things like that. And then for each of these 6, for every pattern, I'm showing how you would apply that pattern to each of those 6, so that kind of throughout the book, you're getting, I see how this pattern would, for this belief, this pattern is going to, look at it this way or shift it that way. And I think that's also hopefully helpful.
I'm sure. The more examples, the better. Yeah, I remember back when you taught me Sleight of Mouth back in, 1987, 88, something like that, where I was there with you and Todd Epstein, and out there in Santa Cruz.
Yes.
You used a lot of those examples. I mean, not those same ones, but the Jesus Christ patterns. I remember there was some listings of Jesus and Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Recited even then. So you've been thinking in these terms for a long time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, these were some of the original sources for where kind of the ideas came from. And so for me, I wanted to, just, and on the one hand, sort of, honor that's those were some of the, the sources from which how do I say, first began to recognize the existence of these patterns. But also, I think they're really good examples. They're very kind of, iconic classical examples.
Yeah. I mean, the applied to self pattern is an example. The Jesus Christ one,
Yes.
Before you complain about the sliver in your neighbor's eye, take the mote out of your own.
Beam in your own eye. Yeah. Well, I mean, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean,
right,
or let the one who's without sin cast the first stone. I mean, that's a very one of the patterns that was one that that at least in the recordings he used a lot.
Yeah, I love listening to those recordings. Those are great. The different use of the word. Anyway, so yeah, it's fascinating to me, Robert. I'm really glad that you're doing this, especially now, as you say, because you're right. We have a lack of communication happening mostly in human.
Yeah, and we have what I would call, or what is called, a lot of what is known as groundless reality. Groundless reality means you can't actually trace it back to, some kind of concrete, experiential fact.
Yeah.
It's beliefs based on other beliefs. It's words that are, talking about other words rather than actual things. And so in groundless reality, the only thing that makes reality is consensus. And you see that a lot in politics today. So I can assert anything. If I get enough people to agree with me, then somehow it makes it true.
Right.
That doesn't have to. You don't have to have the fact. You can have alternative facts.
Right.
And just how many people agree with me, then that means that's what happened.
Yeah, no, it's true. No, it's always been fascinating to me that in police work and forensics and that sort of thing, that more and more eyewitness accounts are not being taken in as evidence,
Right.
because there's so much filtering that goes on and manufacturing, if you will, of the belief about what they saw, so they start to believe that that's what they saw because they told themselves so many times that it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because one of the other things. So there's there's sections on the principles of sleight of mouth, the skills of sleight of mouth, and then there's also strategies of using sleight of mouth, because the strategies are in particular for, how do you do it to either build or challenge a belief. That's basically what your sleight of mouth is about. I'm using language to either confirm or to suggest or to challenge a belief. And so I was thinking about what you were saying about police work, because one of the big part of the strategies for using sleight of mouth is based on George Polya's patterns of plausible inference. George Polya was a mathematician, and it was found, himself constantly as a mathematician dealing with this reality that, you have an equation that, like say it's an equation for computing prime numbers or something. Well, you think this is it, it's going to work, but there's an infinite number of numbers. So you can never say, look, I've tried it for every single number and it works, because it would take you infinity to do that.
Right.
So we're often dealing with situations where we either have, we do not have all of the facts. We only have partial number of facts. Like I'm thinking of police work, where I've got to make, conclusions or inferences specifically based on, incomplete data. And Polya, with his patterns, even uses examples, for example, from police work.
Right.
Okay, let's say one of the patterns is called contingency. If I can show that I can't prove that somebody did something. For example, he says, let's say somebody, I'm going to try to prove that somebody blew up their fiance's father's yacht. So somebody blew up this yacht. Well, nobody saw him. There's no direct evidence, but if I can show, this guy purchased a lot of, explosives, 2 weeks before, that doesn't prove that he did it, but it, adds plausibility to that inference. And a lot of times, the conclusions that we make are drawn more from inference. I mean, the science, one of the things I'm pointing out is that science itself is a lot of inference.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things I'm talking about, and there's David Hume, who was one of the kind of Enlightenment philosophers, said, most science is actually based upon 3 fundamental assumptions that are assumptions. I mean, you can't prove it, but one is that the present and the future are going to behave like the past. That's
Right.
I'm using the past to try to prove something about the present or the future.
Right.
The second is that you can directly observe cause and effect. And you say, well, you can't actually really observe cause and effect. You can observe contiguity. You can observe this happens and then that happens, but you can't really, like this. You think, oh, I see this billiard ball hit that one, and then that one, so this caused that one to move. Well, actually, there's a lot of situations where that wouldn't be. If the one was hollow, and it would bounce off the other one. Now, which one is causing which? So the balls are not causing things. It's a transfer of energy. I like to say Gregory Bateson said, if you kick a dog, you can kick a ball and you can sort of try to predict where it's going to go. But if you kick a dog, you have no idea where it's going to go. So, and I'm saying that these are also how, magicians make illusions.
Right. Right.
You see a woman getting in a box, her head sticks out one side, her feet stick out the other. The magician saws it in half, and you think, oh my, she sawed it in half. I saw him do it, but that is not really, that. So these assumptions, the third assumption that Hume says is that if I observe an effect, then I can, assume a cause. So these are the things that we do when we make our maps of the world, very deep assumptions, but they're not necessarily true. It's not true that the future is always going to be like the past. It's not true that I see something and then something happens, and so that must have caused it. There's a lot of sort of these perceptual.
Right. It might be true, but it's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
And that's basically what you just said about magicians, is where the term sleight of mouth comes from.
Exactly. So that, yes, sleight is S-L-E-I-G-H-T, means that it's from actually from a Norse word that essentially means, dexterous or cunning, and it's about, how do I, typical sleight of hand. One of the things I mentioned in the preface to the book is that I was actually, studying card magic at the
Hmm.
time that I was first writing, coming up with the sleight of mouth patterns, so that you were using sleight of hand.
Right.
And you use people's assumptions to say, okay, here's this card. You watch it now. You put it in here, and you do something, and then it's changed into something else.
Right.
And so that's the sort of the meaning of it. That something I think it's going to be a certain way, and then it's suddenly very different than that. And yeah, so that's sort of the yeah, both the metaphor, but also I think there's a certain accuracy about that. It is an artful use of language.
Right, absolutely, and I appreciate that, because sometimes people think it's like, oh, it's trickery, like you're tricking people, like magicians trick people, and that's not
Yeah,
really what it's about. So to
right.
study the etymology of the words is really interesting. Like, for instance, the word manipulate.
Yeah,
NLP is so manipulative. It's like, yeah, it comes from the French, well, to the man as a
the
hand.
mat, the hand.
Yeah.
Yes,
So to manipulate is to move something with your hand, which is, a really good thing a lot of times. You're right.
right. We wouldn't get by a very without that ability very easily.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So
and
it's
and again, I think that this is the other part of this, that w- and that's kind of what I'm wanting to do by showing some of these these principles and red flags,
Mhm.
um, that okay, if somebody can be using sleight of mouth in manipulatively in the negative sense. I mean,
Mhm.
which is, I'm trying to take advantage of somebody for my benefit.
Right.
I'm trying to sway them in order to, let's say, get something that's not particularly going to be helpful to them, but it's
Good for me.
something for
Yeah.
me. So how do we, how can we tell? And it's always been interesting to me when I listen to a lot of rhetoric, whether it's from, I don't know, political rhetoric or other kinds of things, or sales, or things like that, where you start to realize, okay, there are certain things that stand out to me where I go, wow, how could anybody possibly take this seriously or believe this? And yet people do. And so I think, wow, what is it that I'm picking up that maybe others are not? And so that we can have kind of, my idea here with the metaphors is that we'd have what I would call thought viruses. And
Mhm.
the metaphor of a thought virus is that it's a belief that I didn't uh, create on my own from my own experience. Some of our beliefs we create because I've had an experience. I'm saying, oh, here's, beliefs are always typically either some kind of cause and effect, or if then, or this, or something about meaning. Either this means that, this causes that. But a thought virus is one that I didn't make myself, but I've picked up from others.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's beliefs built on other beliefs. And a lot of times the thought virus is unconscious. And I call it a virus also because it can have these kind of negative consequences. So this thought virus is typically a limiting belief, but it's not a limiting belief that I came up with on my own. A lot of times, when people have that little voice in their head that says, oh, you're so stupid. That's not really something that they figured out on their own. It's something they heard from others.
Mhm. Yeah.
I say, like, typically, I think racism is thought virus. Most people don't develop racist attitudes because of their own direct experience.
Right.
They've heard it, and then it's just confirmed. They just keep confirming it.
Yeah.
So this is the interesting thing. It's where confirmation bias comes in. You have a thought virus, and then it just keeps getting confirmed, and that's one of the most problematic uses of sleight of mouth. That I'm simply, anything that comes in that challenges that belief, I'm reframing it so that it I can keep holding that belief in place no matter what.
Right, right, right.
So,
It
so
reminds me a little bit of your story about the person who was a corpse, thought he was a corpse.
yeah, I think this is from, I think that's from Abraham Maslow's abnormal psychology book. The guy thinks he's a corpse, right? And he won't eat, he won't do any work, and they have to feed him with a tube, but he will talk for some reason. But the psychiatrist is trying to argue with him that he's not a corpse, and so I think at one point he says, "Well, do corpses bleed?" And the patient says, "No, no, no. You can't get me on that one. I know that corpses don't bleed. That's one of the clues in murder mysteries, right? If somebody's stabbed and there's no blood, it means that they were already dead.
Right.
Because the capillaries expand, the heart is not pumping, so wouldn't bleed. That's right. So the psychiatrist goes, "Okay, I got you now." So he takes a needle, cleans it with alcohol, whatever, pokes the guy in his finger. Guy starts to bleed. He's, of course, totally amazed. He says, "I'll be darned, corpses do bleed." So now, if you use sleight of mouth, if you were sleight of mouth savvy, what that psychiatrist would have said is, "Yeah, corpses can bleed. Maybe they can sing and dance too. I mean, you could have a really good life as a corpse,
Right, right.
So, that would be the sleight of mouth version of it, rather than trying to say, "Oh, I'm trying to, get you to, how do I say, trying to attack the belief." Most sleight of mouth patterns, I mean, all of the sleight of mouth patterns never directly try to refute the belief. They're all going somewhere else. There's a classic example of Milton Erickson and the guy who thinks he's Jesus Christ. Instead of arguing with him that he shouldn't, you're not Jesus Christ, he says, "Well, I understand you have experience as a carpenter." Well, Jesus was supposedly a carpenter's son. He can't say no. He supposedly worked as a carpenter. "And you want to help mankind." Well, that's supposedly Jesus' mission. So you have experience as a carpenter. You want to help mankind. Hey, they're having a problem building some bookshelves over here for the library. Could you lend a hand? So again, instead of saying that's a ridiculous belief, and this is what all the sleight of mouth patterns, as you know very well, are, to take it somewhere else, so that instead of being limiting, it opens up other possibilities.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's such a deep subject, really, and it is all about beliefs, and because language, as Catherine Hall Jameson said, does our thinking for us and create our beliefs. It's a boundless subject that, as far as I can go, it seems to go on and on. The other thing, I think the thing that I've seen a lot is we observe things. I think it was you probably told me that Aristotle once said that our perception is 100%, but our interpretation of what we perceive is where the challenge is. And
Yeah.
I was just when you go, if I ask a person, like when I do coaching with folks, I sometimes show them how they're filtering the world to get confirmation bias of what they believe. And so I ask them, so look around the room and tell me what you see in the room that's made out of metal. But don't tell me, just keep it in your mind. So I'll quiz you on this in a moment. See how many things you can itemize as being made out of metal. So they'll do that. They'll look around and they're asking themselves the question, what's metal in here?
Yeah.
And then I say, okay, now close your eyes and tell me everything you saw that's purple. They'll be like, purple? I didn't see anything purple. Or whatever color, red, green, you name it.
Or that was made of plastic, or whatever, or wood. Yeah.
And they didn't notice those things. And I said, well, how come you notice those things? He said, because you told me to look. I said, I didn't tell you. I asked you what's metal, And the questions that we ask ourselves really do determine what we're focusing on. Exactly. And that, of course, becomes our reality.
That's such a great example. But along those lines, one of the other things that I'm pointing out is, using what Francis Bacon, the sort of one of the original founders of science, who some people also claim wrote Shakespeare's work. So he was like a big figure, contemporary Shakespeare. Right. Anyway, He talked about what he called the four idols of the mind, of the human mind. And the first idol he called the idol of the tribe. And the idol of the tribe, and this kind of just going along what we were just saying, is that I think that what my senses perceive is reality. I think what I perceive is what is. And we know that our senses are, there's a lot of potential illusions, even in what we think that we're seeing and hearing. And that if a bee flew by here and was looking at the same screen that I am with all of their multifaceted eyes and seeing infrared signals, they would see something completely different than I'm seeing. They would have a whole other reality than I have. Or the hearing of a dog and smell of a dog. I mean, they're perceiving a really different world than I am.
Sure.
So our senses are actually not direct mirrors of reality. First thing. But then we build on that. So that's the first idol. The second idol he called the idol of the den or the cave, which is then what you were just talking about, our biased interpretations. So, my cave is, the little world I grew up in, my family, my education, my cultural background. And I think, well, this is the way it should be. This is the best way. This is the right way. It's like living in the algorithmic bubble, right? This is reality. The third is, he calls it the idol of the marketplace, which is, we think that, here we are exchanging words, Doug, and for most part, we probably think, oh yeah, you're going to have the same understanding of the word that I'm using that I have.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Even when I use the word or if if I use understanding, now certain words, what is, I have my own meaning for understanding. Somebody else might have a completely different meaning. Absolutely. So that's sort of in the marketplace. Then the final, and each one of these idols is built on the other, right? So the idol of the den is built on the idol of the tribe, and then the marketplace is built on those. And then the fourth is what he calls the idol of the theater, which are, political, religious, belief systems. So we build these belief systems, these cultural systems. And they're all different ways that the map is not the territory that we would say in NLP, but they're all ultimately going to come from language and exactly the kind of things you were saying of how even the use of a word creates a whole different relationship with what's going on, a whole different set of filters.
Yeah.
Like metal, you said, what's metal or what's purple or, that immediately shifts, the attention that we have.
So we could talk all day. I mean, I know we could.
I love it, Bob.
But you've got a book, Sleight of Mouth II, that's just come out and available at Amazon. But where else can people get that book if they wanted to maybe get hold of you and that book?
So yeah. But by the way, it's Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it is both print and ebook, so you can get it either way. But also you can get it through my, obviously it's through my website, which would be robertdilts.com. And there's a bookstore, link there where people can get it. And right now, because it just came out, it's kind of all over the front of my websites, along with some of these, video explaining it and some other things like that.
And what's really kind of interesting to me is that I learned Sleight of Mouth from you literally 30 years ago. A long time ago. And I don't know if you've ever taught Sleight of Mouth as a standalone class.
Well,
master practitioner, but you are now. You're going to be doing one.
Yes, we are starting one actually next month in February, and it's the I should have the dates right off the top of my head.
Okay, well, just let me stop you. You can look it up if you want to. But it was a master practitioner training that I learned.
Right.
It's like you had to have gone through practitioner to get to master practitioner. So it was basically like advanced NLP. Are there prerequisites for taking this course that you're teaching in February?
No, I thanks for bringing that up, because you're right. It was like advanced language patterns. And part of the reason for, doing this, especially like the Sleight of Mouth II, is I don't want to have it. You don't have to have to have practitioner NLP knowledge in order to, be able to recognize it, utilize it. So
it's really open.
It's not prerequisite in this case. No.
So anybody could just say, yeah, I'm interested, and they would be able to understand it and learn to use it.
Yes. Well, now the learning to use it, I hand back to you, because I know that's one of the things that you are, really committed to, is having the practice sessions and the follow-up. So I'll, send people back to you to actually, because this is really it's like 4 days, two weekends, that you're not going to be able to master it for sure in that kind of time frame. So people that really want to use it who need to use it, then, I would definitely encourage them to do the practice.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I will be having a 4-month class, so we'll be meeting weekly for 4 months. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
Cool. So yeah, people can, I'm a piano player, so the analogy is, you need all those practice hours to really even have to master the skill. Yeah, to get into your muscles. Yeah. So if people want to get hold of you for those things, where do they go? Is it robertdilts.com still to find out about?
robertdilts.com is probably the best way to get a hold of it. Yeah. And that also goes to it goes to the same place as NLPU.com. So that's also where people can learn about some of the, NLP programs and other things like that.
Okay.
So it's kind of a like a catch-all.
NLPU, like for NLP University.
Yeah. Which is the training center now in Santa Cruz, where it's the summer, generally summer programs.
Fantastic. Well, gosh, I want to keep talking, but thank you for your time. I know you've been very generous in giving us a good deal of your time this morning. And it's morning for me. It's afternoon for you. So I hope you have a nice afternoon there in Paris.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Yeah. It's actually today is a sunny day. It's been below freezing the past couple of days, but today is a nice, sunny, balmy.
I got up and went out my front door and I saw a robin bouncing around. It's January. What the heck is he doing?
What are they doing? Yeah, I know. Wow.
So that's weird.
Well, maybe this is going to happen. We're going to have sleight of world now.
Yeah, goodness gracious. That's a
sleight of weather.
Sleight of weather. Well, on that note, on that happy note, let's call it a day. So, Robert Dilts, thank you very much for being here.
You're very welcome, Doug. It's a pleasure as always. And as you say, I know we could go on forever, and I look forward to that going on.
All right, very cool. Bye.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.